She stood at the altar in white, bouquet trembling in her hands, while the man she loved looked her in the eyes and said no, in front of everyone. The church went silent. Her mother gasped. Her bridesmaids froze. Ava's whole world collapsed in 4 seconds, and the humiliation was so complete, so crushing that she couldn't even scream. But someone in the back of that church was watching, a man nobody dared look at directly, and when their eyes met across the wreckage of her ruined wedding, something shifted in the air that would change both their lives forever. Welcome to Afrokorea TV. Please like, share and subscribe. The morning had started beautifully. Ava Mensah had woken up at 5 a.m. in a suite at the Grand Ivory Hotel in Lagos, surrounded by her bridesmaids, the smell of gardenias, and the low hum of gospel music playing from someone's phone. Her mother had pressed her palms to Ava's cheeks and said, "You are radiant, my daughter. You are everything." And Ava had believed her. She had looked at herself in the full-length mirror, her curves draped in a custom ivory gown, her natural hair pinned and coiled into a crown of braids, her skin glowing like deep amber under the morning light, and she had thought, this is it. This is the day everything becomes real. Marcus had proposed 18 months ago. A rooftop dinner, a ring, champagne, all of it picture perfect. Ava had said yes with tears streaming down her face and her hands shaking, because she had loved him since university. Quietly, steadily, the way rivers love their banks. She did not know that he had stopped loving her 6 months ago. She did not know about the other woman until she was already standing at the altar. The church held 300 people. It was a beautiful venue. White pews, cascading lilies, afternoon light pouring through stained glass windows like liquid gold. Ava had walked down the aisle to gasps and admiring murmurs, and she had smiled the whole way, eyes bright, heart full, flowers pressed against her chest like a shield. Marcus had been waiting at the altar in his ivory suit. He had not smiled when she reached him. She had noticed but dismissed it. Nerves, she told herself. He's just nervous. She had reached out and taken his hands, and his palms were cold. The pastor began. The vows approached. And then Marcus had cleared his throat, looked past her shoulder. Not at her, never quite at her, and said quietly into the microphone that carried every word to every corner of that silent church. "I can't do this." The world stopped. "Ava, I'm sorry. I can't marry you. I've been trying to find a way to tell you for months and I love someone else. I'm sorry." He had stepped back from the altar and walked away. He had simply walked away. Ava stood at the altar for 7 full seconds. She counted them later, the way people count things when their minds are trying to survive. 7 seconds of complete silence, 300 people staring at her, flowers in her hands, wedding dress on her body, and the man she loved walking down the aisle without her. Then her mother made a sound, low, wounded, furious, and it broke the spell. The church erupted. Ava did not move. She stood perfectly still while the world came apart around her. While her bridesmaids rushed forward and her aunties started crying and the pastor murmured something useless about God's plan. She stood still because if she moved, she would shatter. She could feel it, the crack running through her chest, widening with every second, threatening to split her open right there on the altar. She did not cry. She would not give this church, these people, this moment, her tears. She lifted her chin. She drew one slow breath. And then she turned. Not toward the side exit her bridesmaids were gesturing toward, but toward the main doors, the ones Marcus had just walked out of, because Ava Mensah had never left through the side door in her life. She was halfway down the aisle when she saw him. He was seated in the very last pew on the right. Alone. He did not belong here. She could tell that immediately, the way you can tell a storm doesn't belong in a garden. He was Korean, tall, even-seated, dressed in a black suit so precise it looked like architecture. His jaw was sharp. His dark eyes were calm in a way that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with absolute control. His hands rested on the pew in front of him, still, and he was watching her. Not with pity, not with the hungry curiosity everyone else wore, but with something she had no name for. Like recognition. Like he had been expecting her to walk toward him. She didn't stop. She kept moving, kept her chin up, kept her spine straight, and she walked past him and through the double doors and out into the blazing Lagos afternoon. She made it exactly 12 steps down the church steps before her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the third step from the bottom and pressed her bouquet to her face and breathed. She still did not cry, but her hands were shaking so badly that petals fell from the flowers like snow. She heard footsteps on the stone steps above her. Slow, deliberate. Not her mother. Her mother moved fast when she was upset. Not her bridesmaids. Too even. Too controlled. She did not turn around. "There are photographers at the gate," said a voice. Low, smooth, accented. "Not Lagos, not London. Full. They are pointing cameras toward you. You have perhaps 40 seconds before they get a clear shot." Eva went still. "I have a car," the voice continued, unhurried, like he was discussing weather. "Black. The door is already open. No one will bother you inside it." She turned then. He was standing 2 steps above her, which should have made him imposing but somehow didn't. Or maybe it did, and she was simply too numb to be intimidated. Up close, he was even more unsettling. The sharpness of his face, the quiet danger in his dark eyes, the complete absence of any performance or pretense. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He wasn't offering sympathy. He was offering an exit. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed simply. "Why would I get in your car?" He glanced toward the gate. She followed his gaze and saw a man with a long camera lens repositioning for a better angle. She looked back at the stranger. "What do you want?" she asked. For a moment something crossed his face. Subtle, brief, barely there. "Nothing," he said. "Today." It was the strangest answer she had ever heard. And she got in the car. His name was Kwon Hyunwoo. She learned this not from him but from a discreet gold card he produced from his breast pocket and set on the leather seat beside her without comment. No title on the card. Just the name, a phone number, and a small emblem she didn't recognize. A stylized black bird, wings spread. He sat across from her in the car, not beside her, which she appreciated. He did not speak. He looked out the window. He gave her silence like it was a gift, and it was exactly what she needed, this quiet, this space, this absence of people trying to make her feel better about the worst moment of her life. The city moved past the tinted windows. She still had her bouquet in her lap. She stared at it. "You can throw it," he said, still looking out the window. "I won't mind." Despite everything, despite the cracked thing in her chest and the ruins of her wedding day still clinging to her like smoke, a sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, but something. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Wherever you want." She looked at him. He was still watching the city. His profile was so still it could have been carved. "I want to go somewhere nobody knows me," she said. He reached forward and pressed the intercom. He said something brief in Korean, she caught none of it, and then he sat back. "Done," he said. He took her to a private suite at the Meridian Lagos, a hotel so high-end that ordinary people didn't even know it existed. The lobby was marble and hushed. No one stared. A woman at the desk handed her a key without a single flicker of surprise at the wedding dress, and Ava understood then that this was the kind of place where strange things arrived and discretion was the only currency. There was a wardrobe in the suite with women's clothing in various sizes. She didn't ask about this. There was food. There was a terrace overlooking the ocean, and the sky had gone pink and gold by the time she changed out of the dress and came back in simple black trousers and a white shirt that fit like it was chosen for her. He was on the terrace. He had removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and she could see the edge of something dark on his forearm. Ink, precise, elaborate, before he turned and she looked away. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the table where food had been arranged. "You're very bossy," she said. "Yes," he agreed with no apology whatsoever. "Isat." She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue, and then she was ravenous in the way grief makes you. Hollow, needing to be filled. He sat across from her and ate too, and they did not speak for a long time, and it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced in years. "Why were you at my wedding?" she asked eventually. He finished chewing. Set down his fork. Business, he said. Your venue shares a property connection with someone I was watching. Watching, she repeated. He looked at her without flinching. Yes. Are you dangerous? She asked. Long pause. Yes, he said. But not to you. She should have been afraid. She wasn't. Maybe the shock had burned out her fear receptors. Maybe she just didn't have the capacity to be afraid of anything else today. Not after what Marcus had done. Or maybe, and she wouldn't examine this thought too closely, there was something about the way he looked at her that made fear feel unnecessary. Ava Mensa, she said. Since we're being honest. I know, he said. She blinked. What? Something in his jaw tightened infinitesimally. Like he hadn't meant to say that. For the first time he looked not uncomfortable. She doubted this man was ever truly uncomfortable, but careful. You're a structural engineer, he said. Mensa and Associates. Your father's firm, which you've been running for 3 years since he retired. You graduated top of your class from UCL. You designed the Odessa Bridge in Abuja. Oz. The man who left you today works for Dunmore Capital. He's been under our observation for separate reasons for 4 months. Ava stared at him. You investigated me, she said very carefully. I investigate everyone in my vicinity, he said. It is not personal. You knew who I was before I got in your car. Yes. And you still didn't tell me your name. You didn't ask. She picked up her water glass and held it very deliberately. That's an extremely fine line between creepy and chivalrous, Mr. Kwan. Something happened to his eyes then. Not quite a smile, it didn't reach his mouth, but a warmth that hadn't been there before, brief and genuine, like a light turned on in a room you thought was empty. Yes, he said. It is. She left the next morning. He had organized a separate room for himself without being asked, which she discovered only when she woke up and found a note under her suite door. A driver will take you wherever you need to go. The suite is yours for as long as you need it. KHW. That was all. No demand for her number. No suggestion of meeting again. No strings. She stood in the doorway of the empty suite with the note in her hand and felt, for a strange hollow moment, like she'd lost something twice in 24 hours. She went home. She faced her mother's fury and her father's heartbreak and her friend's collective outrage on her behalf. She took 3 days of leave from work. She cried, finally, in the shower where no one could see. She packed every trace of Marcus out of her apartment and donated it to a church collection drive because it felt appropriate. She ate jollof rice and watched Korean dramas and willed herself back together piece by piece. She did not throw away the card. 2 weeks later she went back to work. The Mensa and Associates offices were in Victoria Island, glass and steel and the constant controlled chaos of a thriving firm. Ava walked in on a Monday morning in a burnt orange suit that made her feel like herself again, nodded to her team, collected her messages and got to work. By mid-morning, her assistant Beezy appeared in her doorway with an expression like someone who'd seen a ghost. Ava, she said. There's a delegation here. Korean. They don't have an appointment but they say their principal. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right. Kwon Hyunwoo. Requested a structural consultation for a development project in Lagos. Ava's pen stopped moving. His principal, she repeated. Yes. He's not, they said he's not here. Just his representatives. Beezy hesitated. They brought documents. And a gift. It's a plant. A very large plant. It's in the lobby. Ava pressed her fingers to her lips for a moment. Send them in, she said. The documents were for a real project. A mixed-use waterfront development plan for Eco-Atlantic, staggeringly ambitious in scope. The kind of project that would make careers. The kind that would put Mensa and Associates on a global map. The gift was a bird of paradise plant, 6 feet tall, in a terracotta pot, with a small card tucked among the leaves. She waited until the delegation had gone before she read it. You said you wanted to go somewhere nobody knows you. This project will take you to Seoul. Consider it. No signature. Just the stylized bird from his card. Her head of projects, Emika, was beside himself with excitement. Ava, do you know who Quan Group is? This is one of the biggest private development companies in East Asia. This is enormous. I know, she said. Do you know how they found us? She looked at the plant. Yes, she said. She called the number on his card that evening, sitting on her terrace in the amber glow of Lagos twilight. Rang twice. Mensa, he said, and she had no idea how to feel about the fact that he picked up like he'd been expecting her. This is manipulative, she said. It is a legitimate business opportunity. Brief pause. I thought you might prefer that to flowers. You sent a plant. A large one. Hyunwoo. She used his name deliberately and heard the smallest shift in his breathing. What is this? Longer pause. She could hear something in the background. The low murmur of voices, the sound of soul at night. An invitation, he said. Nothing more than what you want it to be. She looked out at the city. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the altar and the 7 seconds, and the way she'd had to rebuild herself from scratch in 2 weeks. She thought about this man sitting in the back of a church he didn't belong in, watching her like he already knew her. Send the full project brief to my office, she said. I'll review it in 3 days. 3 days, he agreed. She hung up. On the terrace, in the warm night air, she pressed the phone against her chest and breathed. Something was beginning, she could feel it. Something she had no map for, no blueprint, nothing to calculate against. In a professional life built on precision and load-bearing structures, this felt like standing on a bridge she hadn't designed. She went inside and started packing. Seoul arrived like a fever. It was October, and the city was burning gold and crimson, the Han River mirroring a sky bruised with autumn color. Ava stepped out of Incheon Airport into the cool, sharp air and felt, inexplicably, awake. More awake than she'd felt in months. She had her project team with her, Emeka and 2 junior engineers, and she'd been very professional about all of it, very focused, very much not thinking about the man who had orchestrated this entire opportunity. Their accommodation was not a hotel. It was a private residence, a penthouse in Gangnam, 4 floors of glass and dark wood and impossible views, with a full kitchen, a private elevator, and a staff that appeared and disappeared like smoke. This is not a hotel, Emeka said, looking around the living room with his mouth open. No, said the woman who'd received them at the door, smiling serenely. Mr. Kwon keeps this residence for distinguished guests. Mr. Kwon, Emeka repeated. He looked at Ava. She looked at the view. I'll take the room on the left, she said. She didn't see him the first day. Or the second. The project meetings were held in a Kwon Group conference room with a rotating cast of architects, urban planners, and engineers. The work was real and genuinely thrilling. The scope of the Eco-Atlantic project was extraordinary, and Ava found herself absorbed in it, the professional part of her brain lighting up with excitement and challenge. She presented Mensa and Associates' preliminary recommendations with precision and authority, and the room listened, and she felt herself again in that conference room in a way she hadn't in months. On the 3rd day, she was reviewing elevation drawings alone in the conference room at 7 p.m. when the door opened. She didn't look up. Emeka, I told you to go eat. Emeka went to eat, said a different voice. She looked up. Kwon Hyunwoo stood in the doorway in a dark charcoal suit. His collar open. His expression unreadable. He looked exactly as she remembered. That same contained stillness, that same quality of controlled danger. But here in his city, in his building, the effect was amplified. He filled the doorway in a way that had nothing to do with size. You didn't come to the meetings, she said. I was watching from elsewhere. That's your thing, isn't it? Watching. He walked into the room. He moved like everything he did. Deliberate, unhurried, completely certain. He stopped on the other side of the table from her and looked at the elevation drawings spread across it. The south load-bearing calculation is off, he said. She blinked. Looked down. Looked back up. You read structural engineering plans? I read everything relevant to my interests, he said, and the way he said it made the back of her neck warm. She looked at the drawings. She looked at the calculation he was pointing to, not quite pointing, just letting his eyeline rest on it. She ran the numbers quickly in her head and felt a flash of irritation because he was right. "It's a preliminary draft," she said. "I know. I was going to correct it. I know." She gathered the drawings with perhaps more force than was strictly necessary. "You could have told your people to tell me you were coming. I could have. But you didn't." "No." She stacked the papers. Looked at him. He was watching her in that way he had, focused, absolute, like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. "Have dinner with me," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "That's very abrupt. You've been here 3 days. I've waited 3 days." Something in her chest moved. She pressed it down. "Professional boundaries, Hyun-woo. We are both professionals," he said evenly. "Dinner is a professional courtesy. Is that what this is?" Something moved through his expression. Brief, honest, unguarded in a way she suspected was rare for him. "No," he said. "That is not what this is." She held his gaze. He held hers. The city hummed 40 floors below them, and the silence between them was dense with everything neither of them was saying yet. "1 hour," she said. "And I'm choosing the restaurant." The corner of his mouth moved. Almost imperceptibly. "Agreed," he said. She chose a small jimdak place in Jongno that Emika's food app had flagged. No pretense, no private rooms, just wooden tables and braised chicken and the warm chaos of a real Seoul neighborhood restaurant. She'd half expected him to object. He didn't. He sat across from her at a table too small for his presence and ordered for both of them in Korean and didn't comment once on the surroundings, which somehow made her trust him a fraction more. "Tell me about the bird," she said when the food arrived. He paused. "The emblem." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, and she had learned enough about him already to understand that silence wasn't avoidance. It was selection. He chose his words the way he seemed to choose everything. Precisely. "My father started the company," he said. He named it after the black-crowned night heron, a bird that operates in the dark, hunts at night, raises its young in hidden places. He thought it was appropriate. Appropriate for what? His eyes met hers. "For what we do." She let that sit. She noticed he kept his eyes on the room. A sweep every few minutes, automatic, practiced. Bodyguard she'd only half noticed outside the restaurant. The way the staff had straightened when he walked in without appearing to notice him at all. "You're not just in development," she said. "No. How much of Kwon Group is legitimate business?" He looked at her directly. "More than people think. Less than I'd like." An honest answer. More honest than she'd expected, which unsettled her in a different way. "And the rest?" "The rest," he said carefully, "is why I know things about people like Marcus Dunmore." She went still. He continued, measured. "I told you he was under observation. I didn't tell you what we found." He has been laundering investment funds through shell companies. One of his investors is connected to people who would have eventually become a problem for you. As his wife, he met her eyes. "You were 2 weeks from the wedding when I confirmed this." Ava's fork was still in her hand. "You were going to tell me." "I was determining how." Something crossed his face. "And then I didn't need to." She set the fork down. The sounds of the restaurant continued around them. Laughter, orders being called, the clatter of kitchen noise. And she sat in the middle of it and understood that she was looking at a man who had been trying to protect her before he even knew her name, and she had absolutely no framework for what to do with that. "I would have liked to know," she said quietly. "I know." He met her gaze. "I am sorry I didn't move faster." She looked at him for a long moment. "He left me at the altar," she said. "In front of 300 people." "Yes. And you were sitting in the back." "Yes. What did you feel when that happened?" The question surprised him. She could see it, a brief fracture in the stillness. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Fury," he said at last very quietly. "And something else I didn't have a name for." The restaurant seemed to get warmer. She looked at her food. He looked at the table. And neither of them said anything else for a while, but it was the loudest silence she'd ever sat inside. The dinner stretched to 3 hours. They talked about architecture and cities and what Seoul was trying to become. She told him about the Odessa Bridge and the night she'd stayed on the construction site for 36 hours during a weather crisis because she refused to leave until the pour was right. He told her about a building in Busan he'd torn down and rebuilt twice because the first 2 iterations weren't what they should be. She got the sense he was telling her something about himself in a language that wasn't words. He walked her back to the penthouse. Not close, a careful half-step of distance. His men a perimeter she could only barely sense. At the elevator he paused. "Tomorrow," he said. "The project team has site visits scheduled. I'll join." "Is that so?" He looked at her. "There is also a gala in the evening. Some officials connected to the Eco-Atlantic approvals. It would be useful for you to attend." "Useful," she said. "Yes." She tilted her head. "Is this you asking me to a gala, Hyun-woo?" That almost smile again. "I am informing you of a professional engagement." In the voice of someone asking me to a gala. "Will you come?" She pressed the elevator button. "I'll need something to wear." "It will be arranged." "You're very sure of yourself." "Yes," he said simply. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. He stayed in the corridor, watching her. "Good night, Ava." She turned in the elevator to face him as the doors began to close. In the 3 seconds before they shut completely, she watched his expression shift. Just barely, just for a moment, into something unguarded and intent and wholly different from everything he showed the world. She thought about it for a long time before she slept. The gala was held at the Seoul Arts Center, all glass and light, the kind of event where power dressed itself up and shook hands with other power. Ava arrived in what had been waiting in her room. A midnight blue gown, floor-length, fitted through the body and open at the back, which someone had selected with a precision that told her he'd been paying attention. She entered with Emika and 2 members of the Kwon group team, moving through the crowd professionally, shaking hands and making conversation with the Lagos Eco-Atlantic officials who recognized the Mensa name. She was good at this, always had been, the translation between technical expertise and human relationship. She was midway through a conversation with a French urban planner named Bertrand when she felt it. A shift in the room. The kind of shift that happens when someone enters who changes the atmospheric pressure. She didn't turn around. She tracked it in Bertrand's eyes. The slight widening, the automatic recalibration, and in the quiet that rippled from the entrance like a stone thrown in still water. And then she felt it. A gaze on the back of her neck, specific and warm, as distinct as a hand. He turned. Kwon Hyun-woo stood across the room in a black tuxedo, flanked by 2 men whose stillness identified them immediately. He was looking at her. Only at her. The entire room and all its power was background noise. Their eyes met. He began to move toward her. Bertrand was still talking. She caught maybe half of it. Hyun-woo reached them, and the French planner fell silent mid-sentence with the instinctive awareness of someone who has just recognized a different category of authority. "Ms. Mensa." He said her name like it had weight. "Mr. Kwon." She matched him. Something moved through his eyes at her formality. Challenge accepted. He shook Bertrand's hand. The Frenchman almost vibrated with eagerness, and then he turned back to her and offered his arm. "There are people who want to meet you," he said. He took his arm. His muscles were rigid under her hand, and she could feel the warmth of him through the fabric of the tuxedo. They moved through the room and she met 3 ministers and 2 senior financiers and the deputy governor of Lagos State. And Hyun-woo introduced her each time with a precision and authority that positioned her not as a vendor or a contractor but as an equal partner, a principal. She felt it. The way the room rearranged its understanding of her based on how he treated her. He was doing it deliberately. She knew that. It didn't make it less effective. Halfway through the evening, she stepped away from a group to get air on the terrace. The night was cool, the Seoul skyline blazing. She was there perhaps 3 minutes before she heard a voice behind her. Different from Hyun-woo's. Lighter, smoother, the accent of someone who'd been educated in Europe. Ava Mensa. I've been trying to find an excuse to speak to you all evening. A turn. The man was perhaps 35, handsome in a self-aware way, designer suit, easy smile. One of the financial advisors. She'd been introduced briefly. Park Seo-joon, he said, extending a hand. I work with the Meridian Investment Group. We've been watching the Eco-Atlantic project with great interest. She shook his hand. Mensa and Associates is happy to discuss the structural elements with any interested parties. He stepped closer than was strictly necessary. I'm more interested in dinner. There's a restaurant in Cheongdam that I think you'd love. She kept her expression neutral and professional. I appreciate that, but I'm here on a very focused work schedule. Ava. Hyunwoo's voice. He was standing in the terrace doorway, and he was not wearing the careful controlled expression he'd worn all evening. Something cold and precise had replaced it, and his dark eyes were fixed on Park Seo-joon with an intensity that made the other man take a small step backward before he'd apparently decided to. Hyunwoo, she said evenly. He walked to her side. He didn't touch her, but he positioned himself in a way that was unambiguous. Close, deliberate, a statement that needed no words. Park Seo-joon read it in approximately 1 second. Mr. Kwon, Park said, recalibrating with impressive speed. I know what you were doing, Hyunwoo said. His voice was perfectly calm, perfectly cold. The Meridian Group's proposal is being reviewed. You'll have an answer by Friday. It was a dismissal dressed as information. Park received it as it was intended, made a graceful excuse, and retreated. Silence. Ava turned to look at Hyunwoo. He was still watching the space where Park had been, jaw tight. That was possessive, she said. He turned to look at her. The cold was gone. Something else was there. That unguarded thing, the one that surfaced when he stopped managing himself. Yes, he said. We haven't, she paused. You don't have any claim to behave that way. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I don't. He looked out at the city. I know that. She watched him. The skyline behind him was a blaze of color, and he stood in front of it like he belonged to it. Seoul's own, dangerous and beautiful and completely singular. Why did you come to the back of that church? She asked. The question had been living in her since Lagos. She hadn't meant to ask it tonight. Came out anyway. He was very still. My target was inside, he said. Then after a long pause. And you were outside. And I have been trying to work out what to do about that ever since. She held his gaze. The city hummed around them. Something was building between them. Had been building since a Lagos church, since a black car with an open door, since a 6-foot bird of paradise in her office lobby. She should have walked back inside. She had reasons, sensible ones. She was in Seoul for work, she barely knew this man, she was barely 2 months from the worst day of her life. She stayed on the terrace. So did he. And they stood in the cool October night above Seoul and let the distance between them hold all the things they weren't saying yet. And it was the most intimate conversation she'd ever had. The days that followed moved like something under pressure. Ava told herself the terrace had been nothing. A moment of shared air and Seoul's skyline, nothing more. She was professional about it, excellent actually. She arrived at site visits with her hard hat and her drawings and her sharp technical mind. And she spoke to contractors and engineers and city officials with the authority of someone who had built bridges across rivers and would not be distracted by a man with dark eyes and an unsettling habit of already knowing her. He made it very difficult. He was at every site visit. He stood slightly behind her when she spoke, which she only noticed because the rooms always shifted toward him and then corrected back to her when she spoke. And she suspected he did this deliberately, angled his presence so that it pointed at her rather than eclipsed her. He asked her questions in the meetings. Not soft ones. Technical, precise challenges that forced her to defend her calculations in front of rooms full of engineers, and every time she answered, which she always did with total authority, something in his expression settled, like she was confirming something he'd already decided. He's testing you, Emeka said one evening over bibimbap. I know, Ava said. And you like it. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. Emeka pointed his chopsticks at her. You haven't looked this alive since before the wedding, Ava. She looked at her bowl. That's a very low bar. It's not actually. He set down the chopsticks. His voice went quieter. Marcus hollowed you out. I watched it happen and I didn't say anything and I'm sorry. But something is different here. You're different. She didn't answer. But she thought about the terrace, and the way Hyunwoo had said I have been trying to work out what to do about that ever since, and how those words had rearranged something structural inside her chest. A week into the visit something changed. It started at a project dinner, more informal than the gala, a private room at a Gangnam restaurant with a senior project team. 8 people around a table, the kind of meal where real decisions got made in the spaces between toasts. Ava was midway through an exchange with one of the Kwon Group architects when she noticed Hyunwoo go still. Not his usual stillness. A different kind, the kind that preceded action. His eyes were on his phone under the table. A single look, brief. And then he set it face down and picked up his glass with the careful precision of a man controlling his hands. He caught her watching. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes said, later. She waited. After dinner, when the others had filed out toward the car line, he fell into step beside her on the pavement. His men were close but not immediate. Seoul moved around them. Taxis, light, the smell of street food on the night air. There is a situation, he said quietly. What kind of situation? He took a beat. A man named Shin Dae-won. He operates the southern end of the distribution networks that intersect with some of my less legitimate holdings. He glanced at her sideways. He has become aware that the Eco-Atlantic project is significant. He wants a stake. That's a business problem, she said. It would be. Except he has also become aware that you are heading the structural consultancy. He paused. And that you are staying in my residence. She stopped walking. He stopped with her. He knows where I'm staying. Yes. And he's connected to the other part of your operation. Yes. She turned to face him fully. He met her gaze with that unblinking calm that was somehow more alarming than visible tension. How dangerous is he? She asked. Considerably. He paused. He uses leverage. People. He has taken associates before to force negotiation. The word taken settled over her with cold clarity. You're telling me I might be a target. I'm telling you that I have adjusted the security detail around the residence, and I will not let that happen. His voice was very steady. But you should know. She studied him. The city moved behind him, indifferent and blazing. How long have you known? She asked. 48 hours. Hyunwoo. I was resolving it, he said, and there was something defensive in it. The first time she'd heard that from him, and it surprised her enough that some of her anger softened. I have 4 conversations in progress with people who can apply pressure on Shin. I expected this to close before it reached you. But it hasn't closed. Not yet. I wanted you to be informed. Not frightened. There is a difference. She crossed her arms. I'm not frightened. I know. Something moved through his expression. That's almost more concerning. Despite herself, despite the cold prickling at the back of her neck, something in her responded to the admission. The worry underneath his control, visible only in the margin between one sentence and the next. What do I need to do? She asked. Nothing different. Go nowhere without the team. Trust the protocol. He hesitated. And the hesitation cost him something, she could see it. Trust me. She held his gaze for a long moment. I'm working on that, she said. The following days were ordinary on the surface and taut underneath. She worked. She reviewed drawings and ran calculations and held calls with her team in Lagos. She went to the project office and came back to the penthouse and ate dinner and went to bed. The security team was seamless. She rarely saw them but could sense the perimeter. Hyunwoo came to the project office every day now, and she understood he was doing it partly for the same reason a person stays in a room to make sure the doors are locked. She also understood she wasn't entirely sorry about it. On Thursday afternoon she was alone in the penthouse, Emika at a supplier meeting, when the concierge called up to say she had a visitor. Woman. Giving the name Lee Ji-yeon. Ava didn't know the name. She went to the lobby. Lee Ji-yeon was in her mid-30s, stunning in the way of someone entirely comfortable with it, dressed in a cream coat, her dark hair sharp at her jaw. She looked at Ava with an expression that was polite on the surface and assessing underneath. Ms. Mensah, she said. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I'm an associate of Hyunwoo's. She paused deliberately. An old associate. Something shifted in the air. Ava kept her face neutral. Did he send you? No. The woman's smile was small and precise. He doesn't know I'm here. I wanted to meet you before he had the chance to. She paused. Frame things. Frame things, Ava repeated. Ji-yeon's eyes were direct. Not hostile, which was almost worse. He is very focused on you. I've known Hyunwoo for 10 years and I have never seen him focused on anyone the way he is on you. I wanted to see who you were. Another pause. And to ask you to be careful with him. Ava blinked. She had not expected that. She'd expected a rival, a claim, a warning to back off. Not this. He doesn't appear to need protecting, Ava said carefully. Everyone needs protecting from the right thing, Ji-yeon said. You're the right thing, Ms. Mensah. Which means you could do damage that none of his enemies ever managed. Her eyes were steady. I'm not threatening you. I'm asking you to mean it if you're going to mean it. A silence stretched between them. I don't know yet what I'm going to mean, Ava said honestly. Ji-yeon looked at her for a long moment, and then something in her expression relaxed. Slightly, genuinely. That, she said, is the right answer. She left without coming upstairs. Ava said nothing to Hyunwoo about the visit. She sat with it instead, turned it over in her hands like an object she was trying to understand the structure of. An old associate. 10 years. He is very focused on you. She thought about focus, about what it meant when directed by a man like him, and she felt the thing that had been building in her chest since Lagos pressed harder against its boundaries. That evening he came to the penthouse with files and worked at the dining table while she worked at the kitchen island, and they occupied the same space in the specific comfortable way of people who have stopped needing to perform ease for each other. A playlist moved quietly through the room. He drank black coffee. She drank tea. Occasionally one of them said something about the project and the other responded, and then they went back to their silence. Ji-yeon came to see me today, she said, without looking up from her laptop. His hands stopped moving. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What did she say? His voice was careful. That you were focused on me. Ava held his gaze. That I should be careful with you. Long pause. She had no right to. She cares about you, Ava said. I didn't mind. A pause. Are you focused on me? He was very still. Outside, Seoul hummed and sparkled. In the silence between them something shifted, became more honest, more immediate, like a current finding a direct path. From the moment you walked down that aisle, he said quietly. Yes. She held his gaze. That's a terrifying thing to say to someone, she said. I know. I was walking out of the worst experience of my life. I know that too. Hyunwoo. I'm not asking you to do anything with it, he said. His voice was low, careful, stripped of its usual command. I just won't lie to you. Was. I'm telling you. She closed her laptop. She looked at this man, this dangerous, controlled, impossibly careful man, who had put her in a private suite and left with just a note, who had sent a 6-foot plant instead of flowers, who had stood on a terrace and admitted confusion about his own feelings like it cost him something real, who had told her about a threat to her safety because he thought she deserved to know. I'm not good at this right now, she said. I trusted someone completely and he destroyed it on the worst possible stage. That's still in me. It's going to take time. I have time, he said. Simply. Like it was the easiest thing he'd ever offered. She breathed. Okay, she said. He nodded. Once. And then he opened the next file and went back to work, and she opened her laptop and did the same. And the playlist moved quietly through the room, and neither of them said anything else, but the temperature of the air between them was entirely different now. The danger came on a Friday. It was noon. Ava was at the project site in Uedo for what was supposed to be a routine walkthrough. Just her and the site foreman and one of the Quan Group engineers, the security team waiting at the perimeter. Hyunwoo was in a meeting across the city that she'd watched him reluctantly attend because it couldn't be moved. She was reviewing a foundation detail on the lower level when she realized the site had gone quiet. Not the natural quiet of a lunch break. The wrong kind of quiet. She looked up. The foreman was gone. The engineer behind her had his eyes on the far end of the level, and his posture was too rigid. Two men appeared from the unfinished stairwell. Well-dressed, wrong-setting eyes like calculation. "Ms. Mensa," said the taller one. His Korean was formal, his smile was not. "Shin Dae-won would like to speak with you. It won't take long." She had her phone in her jacket pocket. She moved her thumb to the side button. 3 presses. The emergency alert Hyunwoo's head of security had installed 2 days ago. She pressed it. "I don't have meetings that aren't pre-scheduled," she said. She kept her voice even. She had designed bridges. She had stood on construction sites in Lagos rainstorms and managed structural crises. She knew that panic was the most expensive thing you could spend in a bad situation. "Mr. Shin is welcome to contact Mensa and associates through proper channels." The men were moving closer. "This doesn't need to be difficult." The stairwell door on the other side of the level exploded open. 2 of Hyunwoo's security team came through first, and then everything happened very fast in the way that dangerous things do. Controlled chaos, professional and surgical, and then it was over, and the 2 men were against the wall with their hands behind their backs, and Ava was standing in the middle of the site with her heart hitting the inside of her ribs like a fist. She took one breath. Then another. Her phone was already ringing. She answered it. "Are you hurt?" His voice was stripped of everything. No calm, no control. Just that. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "I'm fine." A silence on his end that was the loudest she'd ever heard from him. "I'm coming," he said. He arrived in 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 because she'd been counting. Something to do with her hands, with a part of her brain that needed a task to keep the rest of herself from acknowledging how frightened she had been in those 3 seconds before the door opened. He came through the site entrance and crossed the floor to her in long strides. His jacket open. His eyes scanning her from head to foot with a speed and intensity that had nothing to do with his usual restraint. "I said I'm fine," she said. He stopped in front of her. He said nothing. He reached out, slowly giving her time, and his hand came to her face, his thumb tracing a line just below her cheekbone, and she understood that he was checking in the way that only made sense if words weren't sufficient. She stood still and let him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I should not have left the site today. You had a meeting. It could have been moved. You didn't know. I knew there was a risk," he said. "And I let someone else calculate the margin and I was wrong." His jaw was rigid. "That will not happen again." She looked up at him. "Hyunwoo, I'm standing here." Press the button. It worked. It almost didn't matter whether it worked. He stepped back, giving her space, giving himself control. "Shin will not be a problem after tonight. I am going to ensure that personally." Something about the way he said personally told her not to ask for specifics. He didn't. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. The stripped-down quality was still in him. The version of him that existed underneath the command and the control, the version that apparently came to the surface when she was in danger. She thought about Ji-yeon's words. You could do damage that none of his enemies ever managed. She was beginning to understand that. She didn't sleep well that night. It wasn't fear. The fear had moved through her and passed. It was the look on his face when he'd arrived at the site. The way his voice had sounded on the phone. She lay in the dark penthouse bedroom with the Seoul skyline glowing beyond the glass, and she let herself feel what she'd been keeping behind a very careful wall for weeks. She was falling for him. Not the giddy, performative falling of early romance, Nothing like what she'd had with Marcus, which she now recognized had been more about the idea of Marcus than Marcus himself. This was different, deeper. The way a foundation sets, slow, structural, the kind of connection that held weight. And that terrified her. Because the last time she'd felt certain about someone, she'd stood at an altar in ivory silk and been publicly demolished. And the scar tissue from that was still there, still tender, still making her want to keep one foot outside the door of anything that mattered. In the early morning she got up, made tea, and sat on the terrace and watched the city lighten, and made a decision that she would regret by noon. She would pull back, keep it professional, finish the project, go home to Lagos, build the distance back up. She would do this because she was scared, and she knew she was scared, and she did it anyway. The next 3 days she was professional. Impeccably so. She was thorough and focused in the project meetings, warm and capable with the team. When she spoke to him it was about work, and her voice was correct, and her eyes didn't linger, and she did not sit near him if she could help it. He noticed immediately. She could feel him noticing. The almost imperceptible sharpening of his attention, the way he watched her across rooms now with something different in his expression. Not hurt. He wasn't the kind of man who showed hurt easily, but alert, waiting. She could feel him trying to work out what had shifted without asking, because he was too perceptive to need the question and too careful to push. On the third evening, he knocked on the penthouse door. She opened it. He was in a gray sweater and dark trousers, no jacket, holding a container of food that smelled like the Jimdak place in Jongno. The casualness of it almost broke her. "You didn't come to dinner," he said. "I had work." "You've had work for 3 days. I'm on a deadline." "Ava." He said her name the way he always said it, like it mattered, like it was specific, like it was only ever hers. "What happened?" She held the door. Her hand was tight on the frame. "Nothing happened," she said. His eyes moved across her face. He was reading her. She could feel it, the precision of his attention. "You're afraid," he said quietly. Not an accusation. Just an observation. She opened her mouth to deny it. "Don't," he said. "Please." She closed her mouth. He stood in the doorway with the food in his hands, and he looked at her with that unguarded thing fully visible now, unhidden, and she felt the wall she'd spent 3 days building develop a crack. "I was going to leave," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Go back to Lagos early. Finish the project by remote." "I know," he said. "I have your booking confirmation. My assistant flagged it." She stared at him. "You had your assistant monitor changes to your travel," he finished without apology. "Yes, because I have spent 11 years learning when to position myself between a threat and something I want to protect, and I am not going to stop now because the threat is my own." He stopped. He looked at the ceiling briefly, looked back at her. "My own feelings frightening you." The crack in the wall widened. "Hyunwoo, you don't have to feel what I feel," he said. "I would never ask that. But don't leave because of it. Don't reduce yourself to a projection call and a signed contract because one man showed you that your trust was something to waste." His voice was quiet and absolutely steady. "Your trust is not something to waste." She felt something break open in her chest. Not painfully, but completely, the way a dam gives not from the weight of water but from the accumulation of everything behind it. She stepped back from the door. An invitation. He came inside. They sat on the terrace again, the city below them, the food between them, the night cool and full of soul sounds. He'd brought enough for 2, which told her everything about how carefully he'd planned this and how completely he'd refused to give up on her. And talk. She'd never meant to. She was a private person, constructed, careful. But she talked about Marcus, the real story, the way she'd slowly shrunk herself into the shape he needed and told herself that was love. She talked about standing at that altar and the 7 seconds and what they had done to her understanding of herself. She talked about the fear, the specific fear of being someone who could be left that publicly, that casually, and what it meant to consider trusting again. He listened. He did not offer solutions. He did not reframe or minimize. He listened with the full and absolute attention of someone for whom listening was not passive, and every now and then he would say something small and precise that told her he had understood not just the words but the space between them. When she finished, the city was quieter. The hour later. "I want to tell you something," he said. He was looking at the skyline. "I have run an organization that operates in spaces most people pretend don't exist. I have made decisions that cost things. I am not a safe person, Ava. I will not pretend to be." He turned to look at her. "But I am not a person who wastes things either. Not resources, not time." A pause. "Not people." She held his gaze. "What do you want?" she asked. Softly. He reached across the small table, slowly, and his hand covered hers. "You," he said. "However that is allowed to look." The city blazed below them. She turned her hand over under his. His fingers closed around hers, and the warmth of it moved up her arm and into her chest and settled there like it belonged. She leaned her head back and looked at the sky, and she felt, for the first time in months, like herself. Not the version of herself that had been performing strength. The actual one, underneath, still bruised but intact. "Okay," she said. His hand tightened around hers. That was all. They stayed on the terrace until the city started lightening at its edges, and neither of them needed anything more than that. What followed was 3 weeks that she would carry inside her for the rest of her life. He showed her Seoul. Not the official city, not the tourist city. His city, the one he knew from the ground up and the inside out. An old bookshop in Insadong where the owner saved volumes for him. A rooftop in Mapo where the whole skyline opened up like a held breath releasing. A night market where he bought her oding and watched her eat it with an expression she was beginning to learn meant more than it showed. He was thoughtful in the specific way of someone who had studied her. Her tea always ready. The right files on the table before she asked. A scarf left on the terrace chair on the first cold night without a word about it. Small, continuous, deliberate, a language of attention. He was also jealous, which she found unreasonably endearing. The project team had expanded, and one of the new additions, a structural consultant from a Japanese firm, was very handsome and very aware of it and very interested in talking to Ava at every opportunity. He was harmless. She knew he was harmless. Hyunwoo, who also knew he was harmless, managed to position himself in every conversation they had with the precision of a man who had decided harmless was not relevant. "You're doing it again," she told him one evening in the project office. "I don't know what you mean," he said, turning a page in the report he was reading. "Tanaka-san just asked me to review the subsurface document, and you appeared from the other side of the building in 4 minutes. I was in the building." Hyunwoo. He looked up. The expression on his face was a war between dignity and honesty that she would have paid considerable money to photograph. "He looks at you," he said finally. "Many people look at me. Not like that." She set down her pen. She leaned across the table. He watched her approach with the very focused stillness of a man trying to remain composed. She kissed him. It was brief, a question, not a declaration. His breath stopped. She felt it, the full stop of his body, and then his hand came to her jaw and he kissed her back, and it was every slow building, carefully restrained, months of accumulated tension thing between them finally allowed to exist. When she sat back, his eyes were dark and his expression was the furthest she'd ever seen it from controlled. "That," she said quietly, "is allowed to look like this." He looked at her for a long moment. "Tanaka-san is being transferred to the Tokyo team effective Monday," he said. She burst out laughing. It was the first time she had laughed fully, completely, without any of the new careful edges she'd built into herself, since before the wedding. Felt like water after thirst. She laughed and he watched her with an expression so open and warm and unguarded that she thought, "There he is. There is the man under all of it." The project reached completion review in November. The last formal meeting was in the Kwan Group boardroom, a room that hummed with the specific gravity of real power, and Ava presented Mensa and Associates' final structural report with the confidence of someone who had done extraordinary work and knew it. The room received it that way. The Eco-Atlantic project would move to construction phase. It would be the most significant work of her career. Emika cried a little at the reception. She would deny having seen this if asked. That evening, Hyunwoo took her to the rooftop in Mapo. Just the two of them, no project team, no security visible though she knew they were there. He had a table set up with food from the night market and a bottle of wine she suspected cost more than her first car. "You did extraordinary work," he said. "I know," she said. "But thank you." He smiled at that. A real smile, the full one that was still rare enough to feel like a gift each time. She had counted perhaps 6 of them in all the weeks since Lagos. She had kept them all. "I want you to stay," he said. She looked at him. "In Seoul," he said. "Mensa and Associates could operate from here. The region is growing. The connections we've built on this project alone would sustain your growth for years." He paused. "That is the professional case. And the personal case." He set down his glass. He turned to face her fully, and she could see him assembling something. The words, the exposure of it. "I have been alone by choice for a long time," he said. "I made that choice because the alternative was allowing people close enough to be used against me, or close enough to be hurt by who I am." He held her gaze. "I am willing to renegotiate the terms of that choice. Only for you. Only ever for you." Her heart was full to the edges. "The dangerous parts of your work," she said carefully. "You said you wanted out. I am 3 months from a clean exit. The Eco-Atlantic project was part of that. Legitimizing the holding structure, building a portfolio that doesn't require the other side. I want a different life. I have wanted it for 2 years. I simply had no reason to move urgently." His eyes were steady on her. "Now I do." She breathed. "Lagos is my home," she said. "We can have both," he said without hesitation. She believed him. That was the thing. She looked at this man who had watched her from the back of a church and opened a car door and sent a 6-foot plant and stood between her and every threat that came near her and said your trust is not something to waste, and she believed him. Not blindly. Not the way she'd believed Marcus, who'd told her what she wanted to hear. But the way you believe a structure after you've tested every joint and run every calculation, because the evidence holds. "I'm not leaving immediately," she said. "I need to go back to Lagos, sort the business, talk to my family." "Of course. And Hyunwoo, my family is a lot. My mother will have opinions." "I look forward to her opinions," he said seriously, and something about the seriousness of it made her smile. "You should be afraid." "I'm not afraid of things that love you," he said simply. She reached across and took his hand. He turned it over and held hers the way he had on the terrace weeks ago, and she looked at the skyline and thought about bridges, about the calculation that goes into something that carries weight, the testing and the verification and the patience required before you put your trust in the span of it. She had built real ones. She knew how long they lasted when they were done right. 3 days before she left for Lagos, it came apart. She was in the penthouse packing when Hyunwoo's head of security, a quiet man named Director Yu, appeared at the door with an expression that told her something was very wrong before he spoke. "Ms. Mensa, Mr. Kwon asked me to bring you to him. Now please." The car was already running. They went to a building she hadn't been to. Not the Kwon Group offices, somewhere older, Mapo district, a building that looked ordinary from the outside. Inside it was clearly an operations center. Screens, people moving fast and quiet. Hyunwoo was in a room at the back. He looked at her when she entered and she saw immediately, Shin Daewon. Not resolved. "What happened?" she said. "He has someone," Hyunwoo said. His voice was flat. "Controlled the way a lid is controlled on something boiling. One of my people. A man who has been with me since the beginning." He paused. "He's demanding a meeting. In exchange for releasing him safely." "What kind of meeting?" "A conversation about the project. About the exit." His eyes met hers. "About you." She held his gaze. "He's using your man to get to you. To destabilize the exit." "Yes. And you're telling me because he also knows you're still in Seoul." He crossed the room to her. You need to go to the safe house tonight. I have teams ready to. No, she said. His jaw tightened. Ava. No. I am not going to a safe house while your man is being held because he works for you. She stood her ground. Tell me what I can do. Not what I should hide from. The room was full of people working, but none of them looked at this exchange. They knew better. Hyunwoo looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze. There is nothing for you to do, he said. This is my world. Let me handle it. And if something goes wrong with the meeting, nothing will go wrong. You can't promise that. No, he said. But I can promise that I have been operating in this world for 15 years and I am still standing, and I will still be standing when this is done, and I will come back to you. He reached out and touched her face. The same gesture as the construction site, checking, making sure she was real. I will always come back to you. She pressed her hand over his. Okay, she said. But I'm not going to a safe house. I'm staying here. He looked at Director Yu. Something passed between them. Here, he said, is acceptable. She waited 4 hours. She sat in that operations room and drank terrible coffee and watched the screens and did not allow herself to think about all the ways this could go wrong. When the feed showed Hyunwoo's convoy returning at 2 in the morning, she released a breath she'd been holding in segments since he left. He came in through the back. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up. He was moving normally. No injury, no crisis, and the room exhaled around her. He saw her immediately. Crossed to her. She stood up. She didn't plan what she did next. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, pressing her face to his shoulder, and felt him go absolutely still for a heartbeat before his arms came around her with a completeness that told her he'd been holding something tightly for 4 hours too. They stood like that for a long time. Your man, she said against his shoulder. Safe, he said against her hair. Shin. Handled. Was. Finally. She pulled back and looked at him. His face was exhausted in a way she'd never seen, something let down behind the eyes. It's over, she asked. That chapter, he said. Yes. She cupped his face in her hands. He closed his eyes briefly. A surrender so complete and private she felt like she was witnessing something sacred. Then come home, she said. He opened his eyes. He took her hands from his face and held them. He looked at her in the way he'd first looked at her across a silent church, like recognition, like something inevitable, and she felt the years she would spend with this man stretch out before her like a bridge she had already trusted with all her weight. There's something I need to ask you, he said. Hyunwoo. Not here, he said. Not like this. He glanced at the room full of his people, all carefully not watching. Something pulled at the corner of his mouth. Tomorrow. I'll ask tomorrow. Tomorrow, she agreed. He asked at the Odisha bridge. Not the one in Abuja, he had built one. She discovered this when he took her the following morning to a riverside location in Gyeonggi, just south of Seoul, where a small footbridge spanned a tributary of the Han. It was beautiful, careful, precise, deeply structurally sound. And on one of its arched supports, laser cut into the steel, were the words, Mensa, designer. Below it, a small engraving of the Mensa and Associates logo. She pressed her hand to her mouth. I commissioned it 6 weeks ago, he said beside her. After I read your paper on the Odisha project. It seemed right. He paused. That the name of someone who builds things that last should itself last somewhere. She was crying. She didn't try to stop it this time. He was in front of her when she turned, already down on one knee, which she would not have predicted from him and yet seemed entirely correct, this absolute man who did everything with full intention. The ring was in a small dark box. Simple. An oval stone, dark as Seoul at night, set in clean gold. Ava Mensa, he said. You walked toward me out of the worst day of your life and into mine. And I have been trying to be worth that ever since. His voice was steady and stripped and entirely his. I want to build something with you. Life. Not a careful one. A real one with all the weight it carries. He looked up at her. "Will you let me?" She was already nodding before he finished. "Yes," she said. "Hyunwoo, yes." He put the ring on her finger and stood, and she held his face in her hands and kissed him on a bridge in Gyeonggi while the river moved beneath them and Seoul hummed in the distance. And it was nothing like the wedding that had been planned for her. It was entirely, completely, specifically hers. They married in Lagos on a Saturday in February. The ceremony was in her parents' garden under a canopy of white and gold, with 300 people who had been told to arrive joyful and did. Her mother had opinions, she had been right about that, but she had also wept when she met Hyunwoo and said, over his head as she hugged him, "You have the eyes of a man who knows how to protect something," and that had settled the matter as far as Hyunwoo was concerned. He wore ivory to match her. She wore a crown of braids and a gown she had helped design. Fitted, dramatic, specifically hers. He stood at the altar waiting for her with an expression that was not nervousness, just readiness. Absolute, settled readiness. She walked toward him and he watched her the entire way, the way he had watched her across a church 8 months ago. Like recognition, like inevitability, and this time nobody left. This time the altar was the beginning of something, not the end. Pastor spoke. The vows were said. When Hyunwoo took her hands, his were warm. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in the Seoul penthouse, she stood in the bathroom holding a small white test and stared at the 2 lines until they were completely certain. She walked to the kitchen. He was at the island with coffee and files, the ordinary morning version of him that she had come to love perhaps most of all. Unhurried, real, present. She set the test on the counter beside his coffee cup. He looked at it. He looked at her. Something moved across his face. Slow, enormous. The controlled man entirely undone for one pure, unguarded moment. He stood. He came around the island and put his arms around her with the complete and careful tenderness of someone holding the most load-bearing thing they had ever touched. She pressed her face to his chest and felt his heartbeat, fast and real beneath her cheek. "We're building something," she said quietly. His arms tightened around her. "Yes," he said, against her hair. Against all of it, the church, the altar, the 7 seconds, everything that had broken and everything that had been made from the breaking. "We are." Outside the Seoul penthouse, the city blazed and moved and continued without them. And they stood in their kitchen in the morning light, Kwon Hyunwoo and Ava Mensa, and held the future between them like something they had both finally earned.